chosen for you some of the best dishes we've ever done on Food and Drink, all-time favourites like salmon en croûte, the perfect dinner party dish, and chicken in peanut butter sauce, an exotic flavour from Southeast Asia. There are some vegetarian dishes, a cassoulet from the southwest of France, and of course there are puddings, a lovely summer raspberry cream, and the all-time British pudding favourite for winter, treacle tart, with a little bit of a crafty twist to it. There are ideas, hints, tips too, all of which go to make up what I think of as crafty cooking. Now that's cooking where you enjoy doing it as much as you do eating it. I hope you'll share that view with me. And now that recipe with chicken I was telling you about, it's chicken with a satay sauce, a peanut sauce. It comes from Southeast Asia, and you need to start with some limes, the flavour of Southeast Asia. There's a trick with limes to get a little more juice out of them, and that is if you put them in the microwave on full heat for just about 10 seconds, you'll find that you get a lot more juice out at the end. I think the cells get broken down by the microwave waves. It doesn't take very long, and they just feel slightly warm at the end of it. Juice of a lime and a half for 12 chicken drumsticks. Just give those a little squeezette. There'll be little tips as I go explaining things that make life easier. For example, clove of garlic. Peeling cloves of garlic are quite difficult, but if you put your hand on them, or if you don't fancy putting your hand on them, the flat of the knife and your hand on the knife, and give them a good crunch. What happens is the skin just flops off the garlic. You don't have to tear it out, it just comes out like that. Nice and simple. And it saves you having to pry things out with your fingernails, which I always find really most unappealing. Give the garlic a little chop. If you're chopping something like garlic, rather than slamming at it, keep the point down with one hand and just rock the knife. You'll find you get much more control on the process like that. We'll add the garlic to that. Not much more to add to the marinade, if that's what we're doing, but some soy sauce, about 4 tablespoons of soy sauce. Light soy sauce is best. You can buy heavy and light. The dark soy sauce is very thick and is really used for dipping rather than for marinating. 4 ounces of soft brown sugar, a pinch of salt, although the soy sauce in there, just a pinch, not too much of salt, and a drop, about a generous teaspoon of oil, which is really there to help when we grill rather than part of the marinade. Now just turn all of that mixture together. Marinate it for at least 30 minutes, but if you happen to leave it in the fridge overnight, I think it would improve it. So I've done one of those already. I've had this sitting in the fridge for about 12 hours. And so it's ready to go onto the grill. Now, another trick, if you're grilling something like this, always line the grill with foil. It has 2 effects. One, it reflects heat back up, so you get a double effective cooking. And secondly, it does not help with the washing up, because instead of prizing stuff off with your fingers, you can simply pick the foil up and throw it away. I'm not sure if that's ecologically sound, but it's a very crafty trick. Now then, just pack the chicken fairly close together. I'm putting all the legs facing in one direction, because that means that you can then turn them without too much grief. But pack them all together, and then these go under a hot, preheated grill, which is what I've got here, and let them cook for about 10 minutes. They're going to need at least 1 good turn. Now I'm just going to wipe my fingers because it's been raw chicken, and that's never a good idea to go on from. So, the sauce. Take the marinade, make sure you get as many of the bits as you can, put it in a saucepan. Then add to it some peanut butter, about 4 ounces crunchy peanut butter. In Malaysia or Thailand, where this dish is regularly eaten, they would actually start with peanuts and grind them up, but I'm firmly of the opinion that life is too short for those sorts of activities. So crunchy peanut butter tastes exactly the same too. About a teaspoon of chili sauce and some water. Now this depends a bit on how much marinade you've got left. We haven't got a lot there, so I'm going to put about half a cup of water in. Now, if you think this looks seriously unpromising, you are completely right. It looks terrible at this point. But in a couple of minutes, as it melts through, you will see it become a beautiful golden, unctuous and delicious smooth sauce. Now, as this comes to the boil, all that slightly grim, lumpy lookingness starts to dissolve, and the peanut butter will, rather like corn flour, thicken the sauce, and it'll go golden and quite scrumptious. The sauce is turning really quite thick and scrumptious, enough to coat the chicken. I think it's, you don't have to do this, but I think it's quite pretty to put the sauce into a bowl in the middle. And just a little coriander or flat leaf parsley. And now the most popular dish we've ever made on Food and Drink. It begins with a whole salmon, but you don't have to, because if you get your fishmonger to fillet and skin it, you wind up with fillets that are ready to cook and boneless. Makes life much easier for everybody. And of course you get the bits. Make sure you get the bits. Put them in a saucepan, bit of lemon, a bit of salt, some water, make a stock, boil it down till it's really strongly flavoured, and we're going to make a fabulous sauce out of that. But I'm going to do a lot of other things first. We're going to make a stuffing for the salmon, because I'm going to recreate it in pastry. Start with some bread, about 4 slices of white bread, cut up into little bits, or not tiny bits, but broken up, because otherwise food processors, and you really do need a food processor for this, don't like it. So I'll put the lid on, and I'll just let you see it a bit better. I'll just turn it round so you can see what's happening. Switch the processor on, and make breadcrumbs. When that's done, the rest of the ingredients of the stuffing. This is white fish. It doesn't really matter what white fish it is. This happens to be cod, but whiting would be fine, haddock, huss, coley, as long as it's boneless and skinless again. And you need about 12 ounces of that. Plus some chives, about a tablespoon of chives. They roughly chopped, because the machine's going to do all the really hard work for you. Same amount of parsley, and the juice and rind of a lemon. Just give myself a little space there. An egg. Pinch of salt. Little black pepper. And some vegetable oil. Olive oil is not a good idea for this. It needs to be ordinary vegetable oil. Sunflower is fine because it's polyunsaturated. And you need to put about 4 tablespoons in, because it helps to bind the mixture when it's cooking. Once again, put the lid on and process it. It makes quite a noise, but don't worry. It should go to quite a thick, herb-filled mixture. You can see it's just done that now. As soon as that starts to happen, it's ready to be used in the stuffing. Now, take the salmon fillets, put one nice and neat and flat, remove the sharp bit of the food processor. People forget that all the time. I've seen great chefs, actually, with Michelin stars forget that and wind up with very cut fingers. And then take the mixture and place it at first. Don't worry too much about cleverness at first. Place it on the salmon. And spread it using the back of a spoon so that it fits the shape of the salmon as best you can. I think we can get a bit more on that tail piece. There. And a bit more in the middle, perhaps. Don't make it too fat, because you'll never get the pastry around it, but make sure that it's a nice, generous filling, because it adds to the pleasure of the finished dish considerably. Then take the other piece of salmon and just lay it on top so you've got a fish sandwich. This is puff pastry. Shop bought, rolled out, and I've cut it roughly into the shape of a fish. The reason is because we're going to put the fillet on it, and because the fillet tapers, that's the easiest way to handle it. Now, Using a sharp knife and having a reasonable amount of courage and starting at the fat end, the head end as it were, cut the pastry into something like 1/4 to 1/2 inch strips. Takes a moment and cut right to the edge of the fish, otherwise you'll have some problems later. Keep going till you get to the tail end, as it were. Do the same thing on this side. And always cut with them pointing, as it were, towards the fat bit of the fish, so that when we come to plait it, which is what we're going to do in a minute, you'll be able to get the necessary benefit. Now, just put the fish, put the pastry pieces up on to the fish in a kind of very simple plait shape. Tap them together. They shouldn't need egg and washing at this point, but if they do, you can always use it as a bit of glue and stick it down with that. Stretch the pastry a bit if it just needs bringing up onto the top. As you get down, you'll find that the pastry gets longer and longer, which is why I've cut it into a slightly fishy shape. But if it isn't perfect, you can just take the end off if you're winding up with too much pastry. I think we may need just to trim that a bit because it's starting to get a bit long there and a bit long there. The idea is not to have huge blobs of pastry over everything, but just enough so that when it cooks, it'll rise and recreate, as it were, the slightly scaled effect. Right, I think that about does that. I'll remove those last two pieces, and now the artistic bit. You fold the pastry in so that it just wraps that, press it down, and just with the back of the knife mark the tail features. That will rise as you do the pastry, bake the pastry. It'll rise up and make the tail. For the head, you take the piece you had left and you roll it like that. You turn it upside down and you just place it on there. You can cut if you're feeling particularly in need of it, a little salmon mouth, and take a bit of the pastry and using the egg as a glue, dab the eye on, and then just lightly egg wash the whole thing so that when the pastry bakes it comes up beautiful and golden. Don't forget to egg wash the tail. And that's, I'm afraid, all there is to it, really. It now needs to bake. And you need to bake it in a medium hot oven, mark 6. That's 400 degrees Fahrenheit, 200 degrees centigrade, about 180 you've got a fan oven. The top of your Aga roasting oven, if that's what you're using, for about 35 to 40 minutes. So, when that's gone in the oven and has been baked, you'll want something to eat it with apart from lots and lots of mashed potato. And I suggest two sauces. The first one, very light and delicate, is made of lemon and the fish stock. And what I've got here is fish stock. I've made it with the trimmings and the juice of half a lemon, some peppercorns, about 4 peppercorns, and a couple of bay leaves, and I've boiled it down. You can see it started as about a pint. There's very little left now, and it's really quite syrupy, and it's got all the concentrated flavour of the fish in it. To that, I'm going to add about 4 tablespoons of double cream. I'm just going to let that come back to the boil with a little stir. You might want to taste it and check it for seasoning. You let that come back to the boil. Give it a thorough stir to make sure it homogenizes, the whole sauce amalgamates. But you can see a lovely thick, but quite pale and delicate sauce. Just what you need to set off that salmon. There's another sauce that goes also wonderfully with the dish, hot or cold. You can eat it cold, by the way. And that's made very simply with cucumber and fromage frais. Half a large cucumber and fromage frais, not double cream or creme fraiche or even Greek yogurt in this case. Fromage frais got a lovely richness to it without having the fat or the calories. Grate the cucumber, salt it a bit, put it into a colander and leave it for about half an hour. When that happens, as you can see, a lot of the juice will run out. But don't be satisfied with that. Give it another squeeze or two and you'll be amazed at how much liquid comes out. If you don't do this, the sauce winds up sort of watery, gloppy mess, and it's not what you want at all. But once you've got the cucumber pretty thoroughly, whoops, you can see the juice spurting out there, pretty thoroughly squeezed down, you add it to 4 ounces of the fromage frais, and you stir it in to the fromage frais. You can rinse the salt off if you like. I quite like the salt because you need some salt in the finished sauce anyway, and the liquid running off the cucumber, by and large, gets rid of the worst of it. Then, just place it in a pretty bowl, but it's going to be part of the serving of what's quite a pretty dish altogether. And though I don't add it to the sauce itself, a couple of mint leaves as decoration add a little touch of bright colour. Now to serve the salmon, the trick is to cut it across like a loaf into slices. Let the guests have a good look at it first because it's really quite spectacular. But if you cut it across into slices, they get some pastry, some salmon, the sandwich of whitefish pate, and then they can eat the whole thing. Lay it carefully sideways on the plate, leaving enough room, as I said, for these delicious sauces and just a soupçon of mashed potato. As with all my sauces, complexity is not one of their virtues. So here's one to make with steak or chicken when you've cooked it in a pan. Fry it or grill it if you prefer. And then a little cream and mustard mixed together and heated through makes the most wonderful succulent sauce and doesn't, surprisingly enough, separate whatever anyone will tell you. Now, one of the nice things about the changes in eating habits over the last few years is eating less meat but not losing flavour. To do that, sometimes you have to adapt dishes, and I've got here an adaptation of one of the great French southwest dishes called cassoulet. Originally, it was made with all kinds of meat in it, both pieces of lamb and pork, sausages, all kinds of things, but actually a vegetarian version, which is what I'm going to show you, has almost as much flavour and I think rather better texture. Put 1 pound of soaked and drained haricot beans into a large pan or a flame-proof casserole. Then add 1/4 pint of olive oil, 4 tablespoons of thick tomato puree, 1 medium onion studded with cloves, a crushed clove of garlic and 2 bay leaves, and 2 Crafty ingredients, a large pinch each of freeze-dried oregano and thyme. Cover the whole lot with water and bring it to the boil. Cook it for 15 minutes at the boil. Put a lid on it and then put the whole lot into a medium oven. After 2 to 2.5 hours, it does depend on the beans, remove the onion and then add 4 ounces of dried chestnuts which you've soaked and drained, some sliced fennel or celery, a few button mushrooms and a chopped beefsteak tomato. Then add a tablespoon of dark muscovado sugar, some pepper and salt. Don't add salt before, by the way, because it'll make the beans tough to cook. Sprinkle over 3 tablespoonfuls of fresh wholemeal breadcrumbs and return the casserole to the oven for about an hour without the lid. Vegetarian cassoulet. A little crafty tip. It tastes even better with a dash or 2 of hot chili sauce in each serving. And now, puddings. Great old-fashioned puddings with very newfangled methods of making them. Really easy puddings. The first one's a proper treacle tart with a couple of twists in it. First of all, let's make the pastry. 8 ounces of plain flour and a little icing sugar, about 1 ounce of icing sugar. This is perfectly good pastry, even if you're making savoury dishes. The icing sugar lightens the whole thing without giving it very much sweetness. Good pinch of salt, about 1/2 teaspoonful. And some butter. So 8 ounces of flour, 4 ounces of butter. It should be cold, quite hard, and cut into chunks. That way, when you make the pastry, it makes very easily. If it's very soft, you sometimes wind up with rather greasy pastry. By the way, I don't only make this in a food processor because I'm of a lazy disposition, though I am, but also because I have quite hot hands, and it's a very, very good way of making pastry. In fact, in a proper 3-star French Michelin kitchen, you won't find anybody doing it much by hand anymore. All you do is you put it in the food processor and then zonk it until it looks like fine breadcrumbs. I'll show you in a moment. Now then, as you can see, fine breadcrumbs, very fine texture, but definitely in little agglomerations, I think is probably the technical term. The next part's almost as easy. You just put the lid back on, take out the protection system, turn the speed down a bit if you've got a speed system on the thing, put your hand over there for the first moment, and then add a little water. Not too much, literally a tablespoon at a time, and wait to see the effect. Different flours absorb water at different speeds, and suddenly the pastry will turn into a ball. You'll see it starting to happen. It's not quite there yet. Drop more water and it will suddenly turn into a ball and go around. There, it's happened now, you see? It's turned into a nice neat ball, cleans the machine almost completely, and it's made. As always with a food processor, get rid of the sharp bit first before you do anything else, because otherwise you're likely to have a nasty accident. Now if I just roll that pastry round there to pick up the last little bits, I'm going to put it down on a piece of cling film. Shake a little flour over it to help it not stick. Turn that over. And then wrap it in the cling film, making sure it's thoroughly sealed, and then very satisfying therapeutic activity. Put it down and give it a couple of quick jerks like that. The French call it frotting, and what it does is it settles the pastry, it packs it all together, and makes it just ready for putting in the fridge for 30 minutes. Now, if you thought you had to roll all this out and stuff, I've got very good news for you. You just pushed it into the pan and you press the sides out. This was a trick taught me by that famous lady, Elizabeth David, who was one of the great original transformers of British cuisine. She's dead now, God rest her, but she knew a thing or two about crafty cooking in her own way. And the point about this is that you don't need to worry about if the bottom's not perfectly even, and let me tell you, it'll be more even than it looks now, but it doesn't have to be because no one can see it. The treacle tart bit will cover up all the unevennesses and it will cook perfectly well, but you do need to make sure you get it up the sides and into all the corners. You can't afford to leave gaps. So as I'm finishing this off quite easily, you just press it round with your fingers. The little bumps in the bottom won't matter, but if you've got a gap or a crack, you need to fill it. It's rather like working with plasticine. And it's also very quick, so you don't need to worry about flouring boards and worrying rolling pins and all of those things. Of course, you can't do it if you're covering a tart. Right, that's about as level as I can get it by hand. Last but not least, prick it with a fork. The idea is to stop the center bubbling up when we bake it blind. Now, baking blind means cooking it first before we fill it, because the filling is so thick and rich that it does tend to slow down the cooking of the bottom of the pastry. So a little bit of foil in there on top of that, just to stop it bubbling up as well. That goes into quite a hot oven, 400 degrees Fahrenheit, 200 degrees centigrade, about 180 of the fan oven, gas mark 6, middle of the Argo roasting oven for about 10 to 12 minutes until it's just starting to go golden. Well, as you can see, it's just baked pale gold and the center's set, which is the key trick. Now the filling. This is nice old-fashioned filling. 4 ounces of butter and 2 ounces of sugar creamed together. Then a couple of beaten eggs get mixed into that, and I suggest, although it's fashionable these days to throw everything in and slosh it about together, you begin to work it together because it's quite important to start mixing it in thoroughly. Move that out of the way so I don't chime like a bell anymore. The grated rind of a lemon and its juice and a pinch of salt, no more. The salt I think is traditional almost as much as anything else. Once again, stir it in. Walnuts. 4 ounces of walnuts, broken up and ground, not completely powdered, but in a reasonably fine texture. The idea is for this to give them texture as well as flavor. People do use breadcrumbs for this particular bit of the recipe, but I have to say that I think walnuts just transform it. And last but not least, there's 6 ounces of golden syrup. You could use a mixture of golden syrup and treacle, or could you use the same amount? They've developed a new kind of golden syrup now, which just falls off the spoon, which I must admit I find rather alarming, but it certainly makes life easier when you're cooking. Anyway, that's why it's called treacle tart. There was a time when they made more than one kind of golden syrup, and there was a kind called Liverpool treacle, which was halfway in colour between what we call treacle, the dark brown stuff now, and the paler golden syrup, and that made the world's best treacle tarts. But this is pretty good in its own right. So thoroughly mix it all together, and then pour it, or spoon and pour it, into the prepared pastry case. It needs to come right to the edges, and it should just about fill it completely. Yes, we got really lucky with that, didn't we? Just fills it lovely. Smooth it down, scrape the last bits of walnut out. You can, if you like, decorate it with a couple of bits of walnut, but it's not necessary, because what you do now is you bake it for about 40 to 45 minutes in a cooler oven than you cooked the pastry in originally. That's a gas mark for 350 degrees, 180 degrees centigrade, 160 if you've got a fan oven, and at the bottom of the roasting oven if you're using an Aga. Now, if you're up for treacle tart, maybe you're up to for custard. I don't mean the stuff that comes out of packets, I mean the real McCoy. English custard, just the thing to go with it. I've got here some milk, about half a pint of milk, just below boiling point. And I'm going to put a little sugar in, not much. The treacle tart's sweet enough as it is. 3 egg yolks and a teaspoon to a teaspoon and a half of corn flour. Now you just stir the egg yolks together with a whisk into the corn flour, and then the sweetened milk gets poured in on the top. Keep stirring as you do it. Add some vanilla. Stir that in, pour it back into the pan, and let it heat through until it thickens. It'll take about 2 or 3 minutes over a medium heat. Into a bowl. Now, a slice of tart. And perhaps a spoonful or 2 of the vanilla custard. And it's every person for themselves. How about a raspberry fool? I don't know why they call it a fool, but it certainly starts with raspberries. And the trick to do is to give them a little bit of a squash with a fork, and then add about a couple of ounces of sugar. That's 8 ounces of raspberries and 2 ounces of sugar. And keep squashing them a bit, and the juice starts to come out. And now, a really crafty trick. This is using not all cream, but yogurt and cream. And if you add a tablespoon at a time, the same amount of yogurt as you started with cream, 5 ounces that is, and whip it in, far from thinning down, the cream thickens up. Start adding the raspberries and stir it through. It doesn't have to be homogeneous. It can be, and I like it best, slightly marbled, so the colours range from pure white to the darkest red. You wind up with the most gorgeous and almost instantaneous raspberry fool. Now, crafty cooking, I've always claimed, is food that's fun to shop for, easy to cook and delicious to eat. After sharing these dishes with me, I hope you'll feel that you can achieve that marvellous objective too.